Hey, welcome to a new Meditation Amsterdam video. It's been a long time. I think it's been almost 6 months since the last one. And I think I'm ready for a new one. And I have today this kind of analogy that I call Polaroids. And the idea for this Polaroids video was born from reading a book that is called The Pearl Beyond Price by A.H. Almaas. Probably one of my 5 favorite books ever, actually. So it's really, really good. I'm making a little summary of it as well, which I may be sharing later on. But one of the things that makes the book very valuable is that it explains quite a lot about object relations theory and developmental psychology in the context of, or how they play a role in self-development and self-realization. So I think it's a very, very valuable book. A little bit on the advanced side and a bit technical, but nevertheless, it made me understand certain things really, really well. And one of the things that I wanted to share was the principles of object relations theory and how it relates to the meditation work, because I think that will help clarify what is it exactly that we're trying to do, yet from another angle. So what you see here in my usual board is a little diagram, and I'm going to walk through it and start to kind of paint a picture of what it is that happens as we are born and we start to learn things, and how much of what we learn needs to be later unlearned if we want the process of our self-realization and actualization to continue, as opposed to becoming arrested in a certain stage of development. So what it essentially begins with is that we are born, and as we are born, our mind is a complete, it's a blank slate, not so much in the sense that there are no personality tendencies based on our physiology, but more in the sense that we have not really come across anything called the outside world. Such thing doesn't exist. There is no such thing as I, there's no such thing as world. There is simply a unified bubble of perception, and there it is. We don't call it anything, it's just there. And in that bubble of perception, lights and shapes arise, itches arise, smells arise, and that's all we know. So we are completely merged in a singularity, if you will. And completely not separated from our mother, in terms of we don't make any distinction between she and us. The very first object that we distinguish in that sense is the object of mom, right? The mothering object. And it is based, of course, on our real mother. And I've painted it here red because it plays a very specific and very special role in development. So that we start to suddenly realize that mother out there is not the same as I. And we make that distinction. And once that distinction is made, the very next thing that will happen is we will take a Polaroid, a snapshot of mother, so that even when she's not there, we have an internal representation of mother with which we can relate. And that begins to happen then, of course, with dad as well. And then we start to, as we develop and start to discover the world, we start to perceive things out there, such as other people, like our family and close acquaintances or whatever, and we make Polaroid snapshots of them. And perhaps we learn what a tree is, and we make a Polaroid in our mind about a tree. Now, that is all part of the normal learning process. And we do that with everything we come across. And if you've seen one of the most fascinating and coolest things about toddlers is just how explorative they are and how they're like absorbing all things and seeing everything as for the first time, because of course it is the first time that they see everything. But what psychologists discovered after a while is that not only are they discovering things, but they are taking internal Polaroid snapshots of everything that they come across. It may or may not be part of development of object relations theory, but one of the reasons that the mind does this is for the sake of efficiency. So that once we come across a tree, we make a Polaroid of that tree in our mind, and therefore every time we come across a new tree, we know immediately how to relate to it. We don't have to discover every single different tree every time, because that would be very inefficient for the sake for survival and getting, just getting on with things, right? So these Polaroids are a very efficient way to relate to the world without having to discover things every single time just because there's small differences between in the new one. So every newly shaped tree would have to be discovered all over again, if you catch my drift. So, I made an example here of this is a tree. This is, for example, the ground, right? Simple as it sounds. Hey, there is such a thing as, whatever keeps you up and presents obstacles or whatever. There's food, for example. There's toys, right? So you have this whole picture here. Now, there is in that process something starts to happen which we don't notice, but which is kind of a necessary part of the process, and that is that in the beginning we are taking these snapshots of mom, dad, and others, right, like our peers or whatever, and we start to form a personality that takes their picture into consideration, right? And so when we say I or me, that I or me has been formed. It's almost like it has been almost like built as an amalgamation of different people's attitudes and opinions, and maybe our own sort of mix of feelings and the rest. But there is an enormous amount of that has the input of primarily our parents, and especially the mother, but also the attitudes and mores and societal norms that we start to learn as we get on. And that mix of opinions and attitudes is used to relate to the objects in our mind that represent the outside world, right? So there is me over here. There's outside world over there, which are these objects that we relate with. And what starts to happen is that we become a kind of bundle of other people's and societal opinions and attitudes, and we carry that around with us. So that's one of the things that happens as a consequence of the way we develop as human beings. Because we are not a blank slate, we absorb a lot, and we absorb it from our closest of kin. And unknown to us, we start to relate to the world based on their input. And what's funny is that over time, even though this is a great starting point on how to relate with the world, in other words, you are standing in the shoulders of giants when you get out there into the world, this starts to become a problem. Now, the shoulders of giants on which we stand are higher every time with each generation. I mean, my 15-year-old nephew can talk about crypto better than I can, right? And blockchain and this and that. And it's mind-blowing on one level, but on the other, it's obvious that he can, because by the time he came around, his upbringing already included a bunch of concepts, as a matter of fact, so he can immediately just get on with them. But see, what starts to happen is that we act as a bundle of opinions that were given to us. This starts to become, at some point, very problematic. This way of operating of the mind, for a couple of reasons. One of them is, even though we believe that in our core, that we own our own core, yeah. So we believe that we have this magic juice inside, and that every opinion that we spew out there, and that every attitude towards things is completely unbiased and cool and authentic and original. But in fact, it's all a copy. It's 100% a copy that was given to us from somewhere out there. And sometimes it's a very obvious and crappy copy, right? So that's one of the challenges that we have as we develop this way. The other challenge that we have is that the Polaroid snapshots that we took both of our parenting figures, our close to kin in our environment, are very poor snapshots. They suffer from three big flaws, which were identified by Bandler and Grinder in their NLP investigations. They are generalization. They have generalizations. They have omissions, and they have distortions. Yeah, like any Polaroid, it is not the real thing, and that's one of the reasons that I painted mother here in a certain way, but as you see here, her hair is a little bit different. Dad here has barely any head, and here he has a massive afro, because in reality that's what he is, and that represents simply the richness of what a person actually is versus the impoverished Polaroid that we take of them as we relate. The same goes for the tree. This tree has beautiful leaves and branches, and it has birds on it and stuff, and our Polaroid of a tree is this very sort of flat, impoverished version of reality. Same goes for the ground, for food, for fun, or toys, or whatever, anything else you can imagine. So in our development, and for the sake of expediency and getting on with learning and with relating with the world, we create these Polaroids. Some of them we mesh with, and we call them me, and others we believe to be what the actual world is like, when in fact we are simply relating to Polaroids in our minds. So that when a new tree comes along, right? This is another new tree. It's a real one, right? This is a tree. The way we see that tree is we are here. The tree is perceived, but it is perceived through the Polaroid of what we believe the tree to be. This is one of the reasons the learning to paint is very difficult, because you are learning to actually see as opposed to think about objects, right? You are learning to see that when an object such as a white wall has blue light next to it, the wall is not really white, it's actually blue, because the light hitting it's blue. It sounds obvious, but our mind says that's a white wall, so we paint it white, and that's simply not reality. It means that we are constantly seeing reality through the snapshots that we took when we were learning what things were. And so the work of enlightenment and meditation, or let's take a step back. Psychology tells us that we need to separate and individuate from our parents, especially from mother. And it helps us do so by trying to find, the authentic me. The problem with psychology is that what psychology considers the authentic me is some wishy-washy version of our real personality, right? So psychology wants to discover our real personality, and the problem with personality is that I'm going to delete this me that was a complete carbon copy of others. And the problem with the psychology, the personality that psychology wants us to develop, is that it takes some of our core self into account, but it still continues to take quite a lot of mom and dad and others into the mix, because, spoiler alert, that's what a personality is. Yeah, and that's the big flaw. Psychology is trying to achieve an egosyntonic or pleasurable state where you are productive and happy and the rest of it, and you say your opinions are your own, whereas perennial philosophies such as Buddhism, Vedanta, and so on recognize that all opinions are a copy or a combination of somebody else's opinion, and that all personality is a fabrication, is a superimposition on our core self, which is, it has no qualities essentially, right? So psychology takes you as far as to somewhat separate and individuate. And the other thing it does is it considers these Polaroids to be the best way you can relate with the world. And what psychology tries to do is to make these Polaroids ever more accurate, ever more correct, less general. Whereas what we try to do in the work of meditation is to say, we are going to observe our attitudes. We're going to become so mindful and so accurate in our perceptions of our attitudes, our opinions, our emotions, that it is going to lead to the inevitable conclusion that whenever we say I or me, we are referring to a fabrication that was copied from somebody else. Every single time, actually. It is inevitable to phrase an opinion that was not obtained from without. And so the work of meditation and self-realization is a complete erosion and eventual separation from the subconscious object relations that we have with mom, with dad, and with our society or next of kin or our closest peers and so on. We truly and completely separate and individuate from those by understanding that there is no such thing as an authentic personality. It just doesn't exist. It is whenever personality enters the picture, whenever ego, opinion, attitude enters the picture, already we are once again doing so on the basis of subconscious learnings that we took from out there, and therefore they are not our core individual self. Once we make that separation, we truly make that separation from those relationships through self-observation, one funny thing starts to happen, which is that these Polaroids start to become a little bit see-through, right? They become a little bit like, what would you say? A little bit permeable, okay? Okay. A little bit permeable, a little bit transparent. And as they become transparent, suddenly we start being able to see things out there for what they actually are. So we see through our ideas of things, and we start to perceive the real world. This is one of the reasons that as people start to become more regular in their meditation practice and as time goes by, everybody reports saying that the world looks pristine and beautiful and alive. And it's like, wow, everything looks very magical. Because guess what? You were just looking at Polaroids in your head all the time, as opposed to seeing how beautiful alive reality is actually like. So those things start to become really permeable, and so it's so the internal work of separating from those object relations which we thought were us starts to clarify the world for us. Eventually, we break away completely, and we completely separate and individuate from our internal object relations, whether they are about mom, dad, and other people, and defining who we think we are. And that, in turn, makes the Polaroids so transparent, right? I'm gonna just leave empty boxes here, because they're still there, by the way, right? It's not as if we wipe our memory clean. It's simply that our memory becomes completely see-through, because our perception is now going straight to the actual live content of the world, and we can just see the world directly and use our memory to learn how to better interact with things and how to not screw up in the same way we did the last time around and so on. But that means that you are actually interacting with the world, and you are actually interacting with people, and you're bringing your true self to those interactions all the time. And that has the power to truly heal relationships, because so long as you are interacting with a picture of who someone is, there is no authentic contact, and there's no way to heal conflict. So because you've made up your mind, and then you keep eliciting the same toxic or the same dysfunctional dynamics from one another. Whereas if you are who you really are, and you see the other person in the moment for who they really are, then barriers begin to dissolve, and our life becomes very enriched. So that is the story about developmental psychology, in the sense of this is how the mind forms. So the mind, as a matter of fact, is a collection of Polaroids and nothing else. And it is there for a good reason. But as you can see, the effectiveness and the efficiency of Polaroids takes you up to a certain level and is very, very useful and absolutely necessary up to a certain level, but it is not the final level. And in our society, we are in a case of what you could call arrested development. We believe personality to be we believe a very, very refined personality, hopefully refined, as the last stage of development of a human being, whereas Buddhism and Taoism and so on understand that personality is a necessary stage that needs to be done away with. The moment is well enough formed to get on with the world. The work should begin to the dissolution of personality, true separation and individuation from our internal object relations with parents and peers, in order for the true individual to arise, which can really bring to the world what they are and really relate with the world. And so it starts to become obvious that all these Polaroids or all these egoic formations and ideas that form the personality are excellent to have when you're a kid, but when you're an adult navigating the world that way, in a sense you're a child, and in a sense you are not living, because you are in a bubble of conceptual pictures, almost like a hall of mirrors or something that keeps you trapped in your own ideas, in your own mind. People who are highly functional happen to have Polaroids that get renewed more often and which are more accurate. People who are dysfunctional have Polaroids that are, very, very old and very, very inaccurate. But even in the case of very functional people who have very accurate and renewing Polaroids, is still not quite the same as an intelligence that can actually see reality in real time and process it and let's say metabolize it in real time and interact with it without any resistance. So I hope that helps. I hope that gives some other angle into the kind of work that we're trying to do, which is that we are trying to have a life that is not memory based. We tend to believe that we need to accumulate things into memory to be able to get on with the world and to perceive or to rather succeed and be happy. But as a matter of fact, it is our ability to have direct perception of what's happening in real time that is the real skill that we want to develop. And object relations theory and also developmental psychology gives us an idea of what it is that forms as an ego. And then perennial philosophies give us the idea of how to then grow beyond the stage of the ego into a higher state of development, which is what humanity still has a little bit of trouble understanding and getting on with. So I hope that all makes sense as a video. I'll probably be back with more, because now I do have more material to share with everyone. And till next time, cheerio.